Right. Last but not least for the morning, I'd like to introduce you to Stephen Walden. I've known Stephen for over 10 years or so, and at the time he was working for Beyond Philosophy, but he is the expert on customer experience. And one of the things about NHS Select that I love working here is that we believe in a global community of learning everything together, whether it's in healthcare, public sector, private sector, but also get ideas from hospitals all around the world. So I'm really delighted to welcome you, Stephen Walden, who is all about the experience. Thank you.
First of all, I'll see if I can work with technology. It's always the most important thing. Yeah. Okay. When Sue invited me to come here, because I spoke, what was about a year ago, Sue, I thought it was going to be as it was then, which is a small room, or a reasonable sized room, about 30 or 40 people, wasn't it? And I dropped an email to Sue yesterday, and she told me it was a room of about 180 people. So I quickly freaked out and completely changed my presentation. So I'm standing here in absolute terror. So with respect to the last speaker who said we need to challenge ourselves and climb that mountain, this for me is climbing that mountain, okay? The key topic here is about, yes, patient experience, but breaking down the silo. And I was thinking about this, and I'm thinking, well, if it's all about co-creating and breaking down silos, what better way than let's do that now? Let you do my presentation with me. How about that sound? So it also means I can have a coffee. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to try, if we got time, so that's the get out clause for you, to give you 5 or 10 minutes to consider a few questions in your tables around what you've listened to this morning. Are we good with that? Yeah. Fantastic. Okay. First of all, the obligatory slides, particularly when you get an outside speaker, is I have to talk about myself, but I will balance it to a limit of 2 slides, 30 seconds, okay? Well, maybe a little bit more. So I have been in the customer experience world for nearly, probably 20 years now, I forget myself, 15 years, let's be honest about it. I've worked with a number of brands from across industries. So I speak with the NHS, but I've never actually worked with you, okay? So I can't give lots of personal stories, but what I can deliver is some best practices around co-creation and some of my own personal stories working with those industries. And I think when you listen to a presentation like this, I'll put some slides up there. Some will work for you. Some you may say, that's an interesting framework, we can steal that. We'll look at that a little bit further. So that's the way to look at it. Because I'll be talking about companies such as DHL, such as Overbury, who are nothing to do with the NHS, but may have relevance for you as an organisation. So, the left-hand side here, that's my website. It's still in production, put it that way, but there is a lot of free, fantastic, videos on there. One in particular that has 3 luminaries in the customer experience world for an hour speaking about some of the key frameworks you'll hear today. So it's well worth dipping in, having a listen, and whatnot around that. So, and it's not often I get to promote my website to 180 people, is it? Also build co-creation platforms, and that's the only thing I'm going to say about that. We'll go into that because I think it's important when you think about doing all these fantastic, almost do-it-yourself activities within the NHS, all this co-production, you also think how you scale that. So you've got the trust, which is the most important thing. How do you scale that trust through the organisations? We do that with what's called co-creation platforms to enable the learning to be held in one place, the projects to be held in one place, and critically the action plans that you buy into to be held in one place and visibly tracked. Just so that I don't sound completely naive and idiotic, I have actually worked for some healthcare brands and in pharma. British Heart Foundation, I'll put your logo on there, so there we go. Healthcare Belgium, Memorial Hermann Hospital in the USA, which is a Cancer Hospital, where we're looking at the reworking their facilities, and some pharma brands such as Merck and Roche. A lot of what I did is about journey mapping, which hopefully you're aware of, and I'll give examples of that as I go through this presentation. Quantitative assessments of emotional drivers and destroyers of value, which sounds all very grand, but basically it's detailed survey work to uncover what impacts your friends and family test, for instance. What should you focus your resources on? In that particular case with type 1 and type 2 diabetes, and the usual sort of consultancy thing, the assessment, the strategic assessment of where the gaps are in your organization to help you improve. So that's my background. And before we get into it, just a little bit of reflections on where I am now. I think I work at the moment on contract with the Motor Insurers Bureau, and we actually are under PERDA at the moment, so I can't say too much either. But that experience and other experiences tell me that, yes, you need to get the innovation going. You need that in the DNA of your organization. You need the voice of the patient, and you need that co-creation. You create an innovation funnel, 200-300 ideas, but what do you do with those? How do you triage them? Some organizations I've worked with as a customer experience designer, I've been at the interface between brand and communications, and also at the interface with digital and IT. And how do you glue those two together? Because those are the people who are going to take those ideas frequently and build stuff for you. Because it's no point just collecting all these ideas from employees, from patients, unless you actually do something with it. And for me, that triage role within an organization is the key thing. How do you build? Do you have the budget? How do you cadence it with the right strategic KPIs? And how do you build and deliver success? Okay, so I think some of my experience is about creating the right structures so we actually turn insights that we get into actionability to demonstrate the return on customer experience, i.e. patient experience. But I'm going to start with a few slides. This is the summary, so hopefully this works for you. I'm going to do a little bit of the normal sort of consulting theoretical gig. What is patient experience? Some traditional approaches to patient/customer experience, where I see it's gone wrong. How we can define that performance gap and what we need to do better. Give you some frameworks and we'll go for there. And interestingly, a lot of what I say will interface well with what Lucy said, particularly about relationship interventions and the small things that you can do. And I think also from an executive board point of view, getting the right metrics in place so you're aware of those. Okay? That will become clearer as we go through. Okay. So first of all, the theoretical bit, and the reason I mention what is customer experience, i.e. patient experience, is because in my world, which is across industry, there's an awful lot of fluff, 15 definitions. You speak to one vendor, they say it's making the customer's life easy, frictionless, and blah, blah, blah. You speak to somebody else, so we must wow, we must delight. And at least looking from a cross-industry perspective, it can get very confusing. And organizations can be driven down the path of thinking that to do great experience is just to take out the dissatisfiers, as I think you're alluding to, and not consider things that engage customers more. And I think this message can be quite damaging. When I've been dealing with some organizations and their digital transformation teams, for instance, and we talk about creating a great customer experience, they say, we are focused only on the defects, everything else is enhancements. And sometimes when I put those two lists together, defects and enhancements, I've looked at those enhancements and thought, am I creating a delete list? So all the stuff that I think would add value to the customer, create better engagement, is just being ignored because they just want to focus on the functionality. Okay? They don't think customer is the key thing. To be honest, customer is not a machine. It's a different world. We can engage them and we can encourage them to come with our brand. That's quite a difficult message with IT teams in their agile units when they're building things. That's lesson one. Experience for me is really a bit of a red herring. You know, it's pretty obvious. You can go to the dictionary on the right-hand side if you really want to. I think it's just really that the better model I have is from Tracy and Basima, where we talk about customer intimacy. Because all we've been speaking about, if you change the word customer to patient, is walking in the patient's shoes and understanding their world from which we gain value from that. That's it. And value can be cost reduction, it could be increase in satisfaction scores. And for me, the key question is, when we walk in the patient's shoes, are we creating value for the patient to which they exchange value with us? Then we know we're onto a win. So I like to talk about customer value creation, but it's also important, to understand, flip to slide there, what things are not as well as what things are. So if I take experience, for instance, experience for me is not about wow, and it's also not about being isolated. And what do I mean by that? If you look at what Morrison's did in their customer experience program, they blew, I don't know whether you remember this, who shops at Morrison's? Hands up? A few. I do as well. They used to blow ice, mist over the vegetables. I don't know whether you remember that, the fruit and vegetables, a few years ago now. That was their view, that they were creating theatre for their customers. And this is one definition of customer experience. Let's create theatre and a wow. In actual fact, it was having totally the opposite effect for their customers. Customers going in there thinking, why are you wasting your money on this? If you go to other stores, there's one great store called Stu Leonard's in the USA, where they take that concept and actually genuinely make it a more of a market-type stall environment. So they haven't done things in isolation like this. So that's lesson one. It must be very clear what theme you want to project, why you project it, and don't have it in an isolated spot somewhere that just looks disjointed. Number two, the hidden, unexpected responses to this. And I'll give you another example of a hidden, unexpected response. Santander Bank. When I moved house, they sent me a nice red cup, okay, in a nice box. No doubt someone like Morrison's had sat there thinking, going to design our journeys. That's a moment of wow, where they'll remember us and we'll send them a cup. This had the total opposite effect on me because I couldn't log on to my account with Santander Bank, okay? All it did was to enhance that perception of incompetence. So it's really important in customer/patient experience to be consistent in your approach, to think about the journey as experience being wow, easy, whatever and walking and being close to being customer intimate and walking in the customer/patient's shoes. Okay. Saying that though, I will show some traditional approaches before I say why I think they're wrong, because they're not entirely wrong. You know, it is a worthwhile exercise to map your journey, as I'm sure you're doing, to come up with those defects and those enhancements, which I'm going to now call value adds, because I hate that word, enhancements, okay? This is an example of some journey mapping that was done, that I was involved with. On the left-hand side, this is for an emergency treatment. And the right-hand side, this is with Great Lodge experience. And you can see that you can get into quite a lot of detail. Each one of those is a list of touch points that are ready and potential for you to redesign in this emergency experience, okay? And you can graphically make them engaging for your employees in this sort of what's been done for Great Lodge. This was done by a company called Strativity, I should say that. I've also used journey mapping and used quantitative analysis to help transform, I mentioned Memorial Hermann, the cancer ward experience, and their key focus here was on improving patient satisfaction scores. We literally went into, not the emergency room, there's a room, I think, where they have spare in the hospital. I don't know, is it the radiation or something where they, some room where this is the chemical emergency, this is the room you go to. So it's a room that's never used, basically. So we put up brown paper walls, and we got the employees to come through and put their ideas on the wall. All that was fed through this system to come up with some great innovations that they could take forward in their outpatient cancer, heart and lung and emergency room experience. Learning point from then, two things then. Journey mapping helps you design. It's a useful tool in your co-creation activity. And co-creation also involves employees, because it's that word co is the secret there. So, and other stakeholders, which we'll get to, all right? Think about how, when you capture innovation, you can make it fun, interesting, and stimulating. We used to take these innovation boards around contact center floors. We used to put it in restaurants and whatnot where there's high footfall. What's the value of this type of activity? I'll give you some examples from other industries. Ito Bank, sorry Peter, I'm using this example. Peter's giving me the thumbs up, so that's all right. Problem with having Peter here is he knows the slides I'm using, so I then have to say, and this is an example from TTEC, because I'll get into trouble. So this is an example of where you used journey mapping to find what I call those micro moments, those small moments that customers would not say on a survey, but are important to drive value for your business. In this particular case, Brazilian bank, customers were phoning in to authenticate their PIN number. Okay? Think of the waste of time in the contact center of staff taking that volume of calls when it can be immediately translated into a new design, chatbot, automated response that would save money and also have the double whammy of improving customer satisfaction because you can immediately authenticate. Lots of these examples. One I like also is Stena-Line. Here, we walk the experience of being a customer. We found a micro moment. Remember that word, micro moment, not on a survey, a moment that you observe that can be a value add, okay? No customer is saying this. You qualitatively walk the experience of being a customer on Stena-Line, and we found that they required you to put your mobile phone number in before you could buy a Stena-Line ticket. Nobody said that on a survey. We observed it. People tend, you see, to accept bad performance. What we said was, that's a micro moment you can easily change. You can easily change it because what's the business case? Well, people just click on Irish Ferries and buy the ticket there. Root cause analysis, one member of the board and Stena-Line believed everybody should have a mobile phone. Now, they may well have good reason for that. Maybe there's some reason in their CRM database. But I believe the better case was just to remove that and enable people to buy, not make it a mandatory field, essentially. It's these kind of things that I want to give you an impression of with journey mapping when you do this, when you're creating your innovations and when you're thinking about how you co-create those inside your organization and how you collect those. These small moments matter. Okay. So now the performance gap. I've been mentioning to you about patient experience, customer experience, so why should we even bother with going further than that? Why don't we just map the journey and go from there? There's a piece of research done in a hospital, I think it's in the Netherlands, called Meander Hospital, with LiveWork, the service design company, and Intel, that found that patient satisfaction could be very high. 9.4 in this case. So imagine what they're doing. They're listening to the complaints, they're journey mapping, they're picking up all those moments, they're getting it more assured, the experience, they're responding to those complaints. But the willingness to contribute is the concern here. The willingness of patients themselves and other stakeholders to contribute for the benefit of the hospital was at 6.4. So there's a disconnect, okay? You focus on high satisfaction, but people's activation, how they work with you, how they co-create with you, is still low. Okay? Going back to what Lucy said about activating relationships is the point here. We have patients in the hospital who you're responding to complaints, but they themselves are not working with you to improve the hospital. Is that understandable? There's that disconnect, the performance gap. And this is really important for co-creation, because co-creation, you want those activated relationships. You want people to work with you in your organization to find those innovations, all your stakeholders. You want your patients to work with you, you want your employees to work with you, you want people and you want your triaging process to turn those innovations into activity. There's another interesting finding that's probably a little dangerous to say here, but I'll say it anyway, but I won't justify it, okay? Another piece of research said that there was a 0% correlation between Net Promoter Score, which is your friends and family test, and co-creation, okay? I'm going to blame Olaf Hermans for this, so I don't have to stand here and justify that, okay? It's just a piece of data. Feel free to accept or reject. But if what I said in the last slide is true, that satisfaction and the high rates of satisfaction do not lead to those people who are saying you're really good to actually co-creating with you and willing to contribute to your business, then that's a fair statement. In which case we have to do something beyond the normal, beyond looking at mapping the journey, beyond that. And the next question is, what is the beyond? Okay? For the organization that I engage with, they consider goodwill as a great measure, okay? They consider that Net Promoter Score, your friends and family, and satisfaction is backward-looking, not a negative thing, looks at the past service. Goodwill looks you to identify those customers and stakeholders who have energy and can be activated and work with you for the benefit of your organization. Okay. In other words, the missing dimension to patient experience is the customer as a resource and using the customer as a resource. Okay? And we all know what that means, because the customer in not just hospitals but beyond, when they're not treated as a resource, is treated as a mine. We've all been spammed. We've all been blasted with adverts, particularly now on Facebook, but let's not go into that. We've all received fake news, okay? That's treating you, the customer, as a mine and not as a resource. And we want to treat the customer as a resource, and the slides automatically flip, which is great, because they can start to co-create. They start to become activated and interfacing on social media. Here's an example of sharing recipes with a company called Vovork. Hopefully I pronounced that correctly. Our recipe platform is called Cookie Do, getting people together to co-create new recipes around this particular service line. The company Flemish Jack have product development, packaging design, marketing, sales and investment, all from customers high on goodwill who do the work for them. Southwest Airlines encourage their customers to vote for the employee or the best employee on their flight. It's that kind of approach, getting people to co-create with you. In my own world, I worked with Ericsson to encourage this co-creation by developing a process whereby I would go to a number of organizations in the telecommunications industry. So this is now looking B2B, okay, business to business. It's talking to the C-level to understand what is your pain point, what keeps you awake at night. You tell us rather than us telling you, buy this large £1 million system. And that's quite a common approach within B2B co-creation, okay? To take your business up the value chain for the company you work with, so you are tailoring your services to their need. So with BTEC over here, which is a company in the Bahamas, I didn't go to the Bahamas, unfortunately, we spent an hour simply asking that question. How can we go forward together? Never mind the large platform that we're selling, what would float your boat? For them, it was a simple case of their problem was rich bankers from the Cayman Islands would go off the BTEC network, on their call would drop as they went onto the Irish network. Not a big money earner for Ericsson, but something that is meaningful to BTEC, their client. Probably more meaningful than actually Ericsson going in and selling their large managed services system. That's a key principle of co-creation, understanding each other's value, which is often not the value that you think. Yeah? Okay, a couple of other examples. DHL, again B2B. In DHL's case, their Customer for Life program institutionalized this process. So every time there was a satisfaction survey where the account manager would go to Lego or whoever it was, they would ask, how do you rate our performance? And also, we will rate your performance as well. So it becomes a two-way conversation. And they set up these kind of relationship maps and these kind of tenders that look and feel different, that really extract what is meaningful to their client, which may not be the standard DHL service. The same thing with Overbury. They have something called perfect delivery. And perfect delivery on each and every tender asks the same question. They call it the fifth pillar. How, if you like, how can we go forward together? Which isn't the same thing as what we deliver to you. Okay? In my work with Strativity and Mercedes-Benz, we look at institutionalizing this again with employees. Employees, as we've spoken about already, fantastic sources of innovation and co-creation. Here we conducted, it's now up to 534, workshops with individual dealers in the USA at the ground level with sales consultants on the floor to capture their innovations and track their innovations and action plans over time. Okay? That is the measure of co-creation. Find those, yes, who have high goodwill who you can work with, but value track the response. A little slide for myself. I did this with a process I've used with Zen Internet and also a little bit with MIB. Create an innovation funnel. Okay? From all the work that you've done, surveys, communication, everything that you've done, co-creation workshops and the like, have on the left-hand side, if you like, or on this side, just a funnel. So here we had, 324 ideas in the funnel. We checked those and prioritized those, and we came out of the funnel with 180, which actually came down to about 80 in the end, that is now being pushed through the pipe. What's the point of me showing this? Questions asked earlier about industrializing co-creation or this approach. My point is I'm showing you hopefully some good techniques to use this and some good metrics you can apply. I'm also making the emphasis on focusing on the prioritization, the triaging within your organization and how that works, because somebody has to do something with this. And this was critical. If we did not have this customer experience check, the voice of the business overlaying that and saying what was important, we'd have been left with an impossible task. Yeah? So consider the governance processes, consider the compliance processes in your organization. Okay. I will touch a little bit also on the other examples, this time from voice of the customer and voice of the employee. I really liked, again, what Lucy was saying about patience now, knowing what it's like to be on the ground, knowing what the experience is. So how do you capture that and put it in your innovation funnel to triage and do something with? In the example of Belgian Hospital, we identified those patients who are high on goodwill, i.e. those who are most active and willing to work with us, capture their information and feed it through to the strategy level of the hospital. What I'm trying to say is it's not everybody who's going to work with you, is it? Maybe 5%, and that's what you want to segment and capture. What I'm not saying is every single patient is going to be a worthwhile resource for you. You want to make sure you identify and activate those who you can work with. The benefit of that, of course, is you get more on-the-ground knowledge and you get these real understanding of what it is to be a patient, and you can feed that in to your strategy decisions. And there's some dashboards and KPIs that can work quite well on that. This is an example from a different company. This is an example from Cognitive Edge, who, don't worry, I'm not on commission, by the way, for any of them. Just good best practice examples, yeah? This also is a good example because they work with you. They already work with NHS Wales. Is anybody from NHS Wales here? Perhaps not. No, it's England. I don't know. Anyway. But they, objective here, at least I was told, was to get their social workers, whenever they went out to see children in trouble, to note down on an app anything that they spot as key, which then goes into this app and then alerts when they spot something worthwhile. In other words, you're getting the voice of the employee on the ground in their day job in a very quick and efficient manner back into the organization that can act as an alert. I've seen X happen. I'm concerned. We need to action it. It's the kind of thing that they're doing there, making your employees part of the innovation funnel and the change regime as well. Okay. There's one key thing that I would say is that it's relationships then are the big unmanaged factor in healthcare. And it's this understanding of relationships that makes the difference between the old school customer and patient experience world focused on satisfaction and complaints handling and great journey design, and the new school of patient experience that does exactly that, but overlays a relationship layer so we can work on creating those relationships to co-create together. Yeah? And I think this is being in part driven by the importance of trust, the fact that you can go on social media and blast a complaint to anybody. And in part, it's also being driven by the maturity of co-creation platforms now. We live in the platform economy, whether it's Facebook, whether it's YouTube, or whatever it might be. And the opportunity that some vendors are seeing. This is by McKinsey, and it was saying, that if you can... the opportunity in healthcare is $6 trillion, according to McKinsey, on creating platforms of trust to move beyond just the silo that the industry works in. Yeah? This is kind of the Facebook space. Won't worry too much about that. Only to this slide, only to say there's some good theoretical, if anybody wants to know a bit more about the theory, I'd point you to Vargo and Lush. This is a slide from Stephen Vargo, who talks about how organizations become networked organizations. So the great work you're doing here in NHS Elect is part of that. You're sort of at the association layer where you're bringing parties together to create value together. I think another driver, let's go through these quickly, is the degree to which we're living in an omni-channel world now. This is an example of how and clinical trials. We can have trial partners. We can have on-the-demand for clinical advisors, nutritional meals, and so on and so forth. Again, it's creating those connections between different stakeholders who've never been connected before. And likewise, in terms of how you manage all this data coming through, from all the way that people have Fitbit apps, all the way people have activity going on, the patient that in an ongoing way can immediately go through to your data centers and provide extra data for you, which gives you potential for innovation. Another stakeholder there is the data vendors. Okay. So I've spoken a little bit now about some of the drivers for co-creation. I've spoken a little bit now about why we need to consider co-creation over normal patient experience. I've also considered about some of the metrics and approaches that we need to consider. I'm now going to show you a few slides on best practice and how we can intervene to build those relationships to start to get to co-creation. Because co-creation really is kind of towards the back end. I can't go immediately to you and say, now let's innovate, let's co-create. You need what Lucy was talking about, those relational interventions up front. You need a process and a plan to engage your patients so they get high on goodwill and then they move to co-creation. Patients, employees, and other stakeholders. I kind of like this one because it says, focuses on the willingness to contribute metric as a key indicator of co-creation and how it goes through a set of stages. You start off aware of the brand, you get a little bit interested, then you start to participate, listening and responding, say for instance to surveys, get engaged more with the brand, and then only then, you start to get greater commitment, ownership, and investment. And it's only really at the investment that you get true access, openness, co-ownership, and co-production. NHS is fantastic for this because, of course, you have high goodwill mostly in your employee base, as I understand. This framework, I think, is useful to you because what it says is you need a cadence of activities and a process to help you get to industrialize co-ownership and co-production, okay? That also means, if I take the example of Meander Hospital, they're moving people from participating through engaged and through committed. Very easy 3 stages, okay? And how they do that is setting up the right, what we call relational encounters. Now, I think Lucy gave some examples of that. A lot of it, as I found a lot in customer experience as well, is just about talking to people in the right way at the right time that engages, because that builds the trust and that builds where you want to get to, the engagement and the commitment. You cannot co-create on a blank sheet of paper. You cannot just build it and they will come. You need to industrialize, you need to focus on the process of trust generation. And that hopefully will lead to an uplift from your customer experience kind of tailing off after you've had an encounter to getting an uplift through better relationships where you can start to move to a new world of activation, the top levels, and ownership by your employees and by your patients. A very simple example of this is National Bank of Belgium, and it sounds a lot of theoretical waffle, doesn't it? But in all honesty, our interventions, relationship interventions, think about the best way to communicate. Best way to communicate here was to encourage people through surveys. Simple as that. Another example is on the contact center. Just ask the question, not just how we service you as a client, but what can we do going forward together. Another example was what I gave in terms of DHL and in terms of Ericsson, what they did in a B2B environment, opening up the conversation, how can we go forward together, is really all you need to do with one organization, Tarmac. I went along to their buyers And what I found was nobody had spoken to them about the buyer's business. So they had lots of sales reps going out saying, how are we selling to you today almost? But nobody said, what's important for your business? And what I found as a consultant in that environment, we opened up the conversation a little bit more, was one company that was in the Midlands that wanted the large trucks and willing to pay a premium for it because they were putting all this cement or whatnot to build these huge warehouses, and the trucks were in Holland. Found another company that had specialist needs in terms of microsurfacing, and I have no idea what that was, but it sounded exciting. These are sales opportunities in that particular company, for that particular company, that only been released when we'd engaged in good conversation. Okay? So, relationship is different from experience. It sits on top of experience and can deliver great value for you, but it needs different processes. That's the message. Okay, so enough of that. I said I was going to have I got how much time? 5 minutes? 2 minutes. Got 2 minutes, so I'm not going to co-create with you. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave you with some questions, okay, to think. And I think these questions really frame it for you. The questions you need to ask is, if we're going to treat the patient not as a mine, but as a resource for our business, how can we do that? What could the patient do for your organization, not just what you can do for them? Okay? That's a question. Example, they could self-serve. They can self-care. They can give feedback and input to you, as we've discussed in terms of voice of the customer programs and voice of employee. They can support others, social networking. Another question, the patient's network. What could the patient's network do for your organization? This is a classic social media, isn't it? This is the classic interface of treatment, illness, and social system. One network I showed you was when we went through that clinical trial slide with clinical wellness partners and how you can interface through omni-channel, multiple channels, various partners together, which you could never have done before. So that's another question. So we got one question of how the patient can be a resource for you, a second question of how the patient's network could be a resource for you. Then consider the client value. Looking at the activities you thought of for your customer as a resource, what could motivate your customers to do so? This is all about identifying those who are willing to work with you, are committed, engaged, or participating, engaged, and committed, willing to work for you to help you for the future. That's where I spoke about segmenting by the goodwill metric. Of course, do your NPS, your friends and family, and satisfaction, but also think forwardly. Yeah? And the organizational value, of course, taking the activities from the previous exercise, now think of the organizational value they could provide to you in your context. So this could be sell more, tarmac. This could be win more business or improve service satisfaction. An example here is how we co-created with CBRE, the Facilities Management Organization, with staff and clients to create a system whereby we had good communication where occupants, in this case Deloitte's Bank, were signaling problems to the staff. Okay? Not just the staff responding to the facilities. Then I can't, as being coming from a consulting background, leave without a 2x2 box, and hopefully this will help you. Think about what value can the patient contribute to you as an organization, shooting for co-ownership and co-production, in the short term, the long term, operationally and strategically. So hopefully what I've delivered is just a little bit of a reflections, picking up on these relational moments, how we create relational moments, how we capture them, how we institutionalize them, and how we create new opportunities. Relationship is a different process to customer experience, different metrics, different cadence. But also, always be aware, it's easy to get ideas, it's really challenging to implement them, okay? And this speaks to compliance, it speaks to governance, and it critically speaks to mindset. Is the mindset ready in the organization, and where is it ready? I spoke about the example of my agile teams talking about defects and enhancements. That's kind of process, which is in a lot of companies. If I come in as a customer experience designer halfway through that process, I'm lost. It needs to be the right language and the right frameworks at the very beginning to put it into the language of those people who will turn your ideas into action, and that's that action that will demonstrate return, which will build cadence and drive in your organization to co-create more. Hopefully that was okay. Thank you for your time.